The lunch was Marcus's idea. He suggested Portello's, an Italian place on 5th with cloth napkins and bread they brought without you asking. I had been to Portello's once before, about 8 months ago, for a reason that would matter later. There were 7 of us. Marcus, Priya, Tyler, Colin, a new hire named Becca, and my manager Derek, who insisted on sitting at the head even though it was supposed to be a casual team lunch. Derek made everything about hierarchy. I was mid-sentence, telling Priya about a vendor call I'd handled that morning, when Derek stood up, not to go to the bathroom. He stood the way people stand when they have already decided something and are ready to perform it. He picked up his water glass, set it down, and looked directly at me. I've been holding off on this because I wanted to handle it professionally, he said. His voice carried. The next table went quiet. But Anna, the Kellerman delivery failure, that's on you. That kind of negligence is not something I can overlook. Effective immediately, he said, you're terminated. The table went completely still. And from the corner of my eye, I noticed the restaurant owner watching. Nobody spoke. For about 4 seconds, the whole table was frozen. Bread halfway to mouths. Glasses stopped mid-lift. Tyler stared at the tablecloth. Priya's face went carefully blank, the way faces go when people decide very fast not to get involved. Becca looked at Derek like she was watching a car accident she hadn't expected to see on her 3rd week of work. Derek sat back down. He had done what he came to do, and now he was composing himself with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had handled something difficult with great professionalism. He reached for his glass. He sipped.
He didn't look at me.
I sat there for one full moment. Then I looked at him. You're sure about this? I said. My voice was level. Not confrontational. Not shaking. Just clear. Derek met my eyes. Completely, he said. And the thing about that word, completely, was that it was the most honest thing he had said all afternoon. In that single moment of total certainty, Derek confirmed exactly what I needed him to. He had no idea what he had just done. I nodded once, folded my napkin, placed it on the table, and started gathering my things. I had my bag on my shoulder and was pushing back my chair when I heard footsteps from my left. The owner of Portello's was a man named Vincent Caruso. His name was on the wall near the host stand in a small brass frame. He was in his mid-60s, with silver hair and the kind of unhurried walk that said he had been doing this a long time. He walked over to our table without looking at Derek.
He looked at me.
Excuse the interruption, he said. Then, directly, are you all right? I blinked. I'm yes. Thank you. He nodded. Then, in the way someone says a name when they want to make sure they have it right. Anna Reyes? And there it was. My full name, said calmly in the middle of a restaurant by a man I had met once for about 45 minutes, 8 months ago. Yes, I said. And I watched Derek's face change. Not dramatically, just slightly. A small shift behind the eyes, the kind that happens when the room stops cooperating with your version of events. How does he know you? Derek asked. I didn't answer. Neither, for a moment, did Vincent. Vincent pulled a chair from the empty table beside ours and sat down like a man who owned the space, which he did. About 8 months ago, he said, this restaurant nearly lost its operating certification. A documentation gap involving our cold storage vendor chain. 3 days before city inspection. He paused. Let that sit. Anna was working on a vendor logistics project that overlapped with our problem. She spent 2 lunch breaks helping me understand the documentation requirements and get the right filing submitted. We passed the inspection. I didn't even have her number. She just helped because she understood the system and someone needed help.
He looked at Derek.
I say this because I've been watching this table for the last 10 minutes. The woman you just fired in my restaurant in front of her colleagues is not someone who causes problems. He paused. She's the kind of person who solves them before other people notice they exist. Derek smiled the tight smile of a man trying to regain control. I appreciate your perspective, he said. Vincent said nothing further. Just looked at Derek for a moment. Then back at me. You might want to reconsider how you treat people like her. I thanked Vincent quietly before I left. He walked me to the door, not dramatically, just the natural way a host walks someone out. He pressed a small card into my hand. Call me if you ever need anything.
I mean that.
I stepped outside and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The street was busy. Normal city noise, the kind that usually fades into background. That day it felt like it was happening on the other side of a glass wall. I walked to the corner, sat on a bench, opened my phone.
I was shaken. I want to be honest about that.
7 years at that company. 7 years of early mornings and late emails and projects I had carried quietly because the alternative was watching them fall. And Derek had ended it in a restaurant, mid-lunch, with no warning and false accusations, in front of 6 other people. But the shakiness faded fast, because something else was already moving underneath it. I pulled up my work email. I hadn't been locked out yet. IT was probably waiting for an official termination processing window. I started scrolling back through my sent folder, and then I found what I was looking for. The email chain was dated 11 weeks ago. Subject line, Kellerman account, delivery risk assessment. I had sent it at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday when I ran the numbers on the vendor routing schedule and realized it was structurally fragile. Not broken yet, but a single delay at any of 3 points would collapse the entire timeline. I laid it out clearly, risk item by risk item. Attached a contingency routing document I built from scratch. Tagged the relevant vendors. And I had copied Derek. Derek replied 3 days later. 5 lines. The first 2 acknowledged receipt. The third suggested the risk was likely manageable. The fourth reassigned the contingency document to Tyler for tracking purposes. The fifth said we should revisit at the monthly check-in. The monthly check-in was scheduled for 2 weeks after the Kellerman delivery was due. In 5 lines, he had read my warning, noted it, transferred ownership to someone without context, and scheduled the follow-up after the damage could have been done. Then today he had stood up in a restaurant and called that warning my negligence. I forwarded the chain to my personal email and a backup account. Then I closed the app. My hands were steady. Here is what nobody at that lunch table fully knew about my role. My title was Senior Delivery Coordinator. Coordinator's coordinate. Derek had once described the position to a new VP that way, like it was self-evidently minor. What the title didn't describe was the system I had built. Over 4 years, I had designed and maintained the entire back-end logistics workflow for our delivery operations. Every client contract had a routing map. Every vendor relationship had a redundancy protocol. Every compliance checkpoint was tied to a trigger in a tracker I had built, color-coded, time-stamped, cross-referenced against deadlines and regulatory requirements for the 6 states we operated in. Nobody had asked me to build it. I built it because the alternative was watching things fail. Nobody else fully understood how it worked. Not because I had hidden anything. The documentation was there, in a shared drive folder labeled Operations Framework, last accessed by me. When I walked out of Portillo's, that system was still running.
For now.
But without someone who understood its logic, who knew which flag meant real risk, it would start making errors in predictable ways. The first one would probably show up within 48 hours. The first one showed up in 22. I know this because Priya texted me the next morning. Not about the firing, she had been careful about that. Her text was brief.
Hey.
Quick question. Do you remember who manages the Harmon routing account? Someone on the team is looking for it and can't find the contact. I stared at the message for a moment. The Harmon routing account was not in the general vendor database. I had kept it in the secondary tracker, the one that fed into the operations framework, because Harmon had a non-standard contract structure requiring a specific escalation path. It wasn't missing. It was exactly where it had always been. But finding it required knowing the secondary tracker existed. I texted back. It's in the Ops Framework folder. Secondary tracker, tab 3, row 14. She replied with a thumbs up. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and poured myself coffee. I didn't feel smug. I felt the particular tiredness that comes from having built something carefully over years and watching the first tremors of a structure, finding out it was more weight-bearing than anyone had acknowledged. Derek would dismiss it as a minor glitch. He was going to dismiss several things as minor glitches before the week was over. By Wednesday, the glitches had a name. Priya had started texting me daily, cautiously at first, testing ice before stepping on it. A client had flagged an inconsistency in their delivery confirmation record. A vendor invoice didn't match the contract rate. A compliance checkpoint that was supposed to auto-trigger on day 14 of a new client onboarding hadn't fired. None were catastrophic alone. Together, they were the beginning of a very specific kind of collapse, the kind that happens when a system runs without the person who understands its logic. Like a watch keeping time for a few days after you remove the winding mechanism. Accurate on the surface, quietly failing inside. Priya wrote, "Someone asked today if you handled this stuff." I wrote back, "What did Derek say?" She paused before answering. I could see the typing indicator appear and disappear twice. Then, "He said you had left things disorganized." Disorganized. I thought about the 4 years of timestamp documentation in the operations framework folder, the color-coded compliance tracker with auto alerts, the contingency routing protocols built for exactly this situation. I picked my phone back up. "Don't worry about me," I told Priya. "Just document everything you're seeing. Dates, times, what was affected." She sent back, "Already am." Derek held a team huddle on Thursday. I know what happened because Priya told me, and because she had started taking notes on her personal phone as I suggested. Derek stood at the whiteboard and explained that current issues were a result of transition turbulence, a phrase he used twice, and that the team should expect a short adjustment period while legacy processes were updated to reflect the new workflow direction. He told the team documentation was being reorganized and he would have a new system guide ready by end of next week. Then he assigned Tyler to take point on the Kellerman recovery and told him to start fresh, which meant Tyler would be building from scratch what already existed, simply because Derek hadn't told him where to look. When Marcus asked about the compliance checkpoint that had misfired, Derek said Anna had handled that process without properly handing it off before her departure. I had not been given a departure meeting, or a handoff conversation, or a phone call. I had been fired mid-lunch and walked out. None of the team corrected him, but Priya was taking notes, and the notes were becoming a record. On Friday afternoon, IT sent an all-hands notice about a system audit. Routine on its face. But Priya forwarded it to me with one word. Look. Attached was an internal report on system architecture dependencies. Someone in IT, running the audit prep, had discovered that 17 active client workflows were built on top of a database framework with a single owner credential. Mine. Not because I had locked it down intentionally. Because when I built the operations framework, I had built it using my company credentials, as any employee does when building tools for work, and nobody had ever asked to transfer ownership, formalize it, or document that it existed at the enterprise level. It had lived quietly under my name for 4 years, invisible to everyone except the people who benefited from its outputs. Now I was gone. The framework was still running. But it was running with an orphaned credential, my revoked employee ID, meaning any attempt to update, modify, or access the administrative layer would fail. The compliance triggers that hadn't fired? Connected to the framework. The vendor routing tracker? Connected to the framework. 17 active client workflows. All of them quietly depending on a system nobody had acknowledged until it started breaking. Vincent Caruso made a phone call on Friday evening. I didn't know about it until later. Priya told me the following week, piecing together what she'd heard from Marcus, who had heard it from someone in operations who was in the room when the executive team started asking questions. Vincent had not called the company directly. He had called a man named Philip Gaines, a long-time regular at Portello's, who came every Thursday for the veal and the same table by the window. Philip Gaines was the VP of client strategy at the firm I had worked for, 2 levels above Derek. Vincent described what he had witnessed at the lunch. The public firing. The accusations made in front of colleagues. The tone. He mentioned my name. Then he said one other thing. That in his experience, people willing to spend their lunch breaks helping a stranger navigate a compliance crisis were not typically the kind of people who caused them. Philip Gaines thanked him and said he would investigate it. He made 4 calls that weekend. By Monday morning, before Derek had arrived at the office, there was a meeting request on the COO's calendar. Subject: Kellerman account. Internal review. Monday was when everything changed direction. I didn't know the details in real time. I was at home, applying for positions, responding to a recruiter email, making coffee. But the cascade was already moving, and by early afternoon Priya had texted me 3 times in 90 minutes, which was unusual enough that I called her. She answered on the first ring. "Okay," she said low and fast. 2 major clients flagged compliance issues this morning, both tied to the operations framework triggers. One of them, Bertrand Group, formally escalated to their account manager and said if the issue wasn't resolved with documentation by end of week, they were pausing the contract. "How much is the Bertrand Group contract worth?" I asked. A pause. "A lot." "And the other client?" "Hartwell Logistics. They sent a formal letter. Their legal team is involved." I sat down on my couch. "Derek is telling upper management it's a systems issue," Priya said. "That it's IT's problem." "What is IT saying?" "That the system was functioning perfectly until the credential owner's access was terminated." There was a long silence.
"Priya," I said.
"Have they found my warning email yet?" Another pause. "Someone's about to." The email arrived in the COO's inbox at 11:14 a.m. on Monday. It was forwarded by Marcus, who had spent the weekend reading back through the shared drive and team email history after Philip Gaines had asked the operations team for an informal documentation review. Marcus wasn't doing it to help me. He was doing it because, when asked to find documentation, he looked for it. He found my Kellerman risk email chain, dated 11 weeks earlier. My full risk breakdown, the contingency routing document, and Derek's 5-line reply redirecting responsibility to Tyler. He forwarded the full chain to Philip Gaines with a single note. "Thought you should see this." Gaines forwarded it to the COO with no note at all. The COO read it and scheduled a formal meeting for 2 p.m. Derek was not in the meeting. The meeting was about Derek. What happened in the room, I only heard secondhand. But the summary, as Priya described it, was this. Leadership had been operating on Derek's version, that the Kellerman failure was Anna Reyes's negligence. The email chain did not support that version. It supported the opposite with timestamps. The COO asked one question before the meeting ended. Why wasn't this acted on? Derek was asked to explain himself on Tuesday morning. He had been called into a meeting with the COO and 2 senior leaders and presented with the email chain, the IT dependency report, the client escalation letters, and Vincent Caruso's account of what had occurred at Portello's. Derek's response was to suggest the email chain was taken out of context, that my risk assessment had been vague, that the system dependency was a structural IT oversight, not a personnel issue. Senior leadership listened. Then one of them asked, if her risk assessment was vague, why did you forward the contingency routing document she built to Tyler without explanation? Derek said the document was incomplete. They pulled it up on the screen. It was 53 pages, with an index. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the COO said, I think we need to take a short break. And Derek understood in that break what the rest of the meeting was going to be.
He was right.
The meeting resumed 15 minutes later and did not end in Derek's favor. It ended with a question about next steps and a decision that had already been made before anyone sat back down. Philip Gaines contacted me directly on Tuesday afternoon. The message came through LinkedIn, professional, brief. He introduced himself, acknowledged I was no longer with the company, and asked if I was open to speaking. He included his direct number. I called him that evening. He was straightforward. He apologized first, not on behalf of Derek, but on behalf of the company's failure to have sufficient oversight to prevent what had happened. He said that was a structural failing and he owned it. Then he told me the factual situation. Bertrand Group had paused their contract. Hartwell Logistics had formally entered a breach review process. 2 smaller clients had raised questions. The operations framework could not be accessed at the administrative level without either my credentials being reinstated or a full migration to a new system, which IT estimated at 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Legal was involved. Then he said, I've read every email in that chain, Anna. I've read your contingency document. I know what you built, and I know what happened to it. I want to make this right. I thanked him for calling. I told him I needed a few days. He said, take what you need. They tried to reach me twice before Philip's call. HR had emailed on Monday morning a carefully worded message about reconnecting regarding your transition that read like something assembled by committee. I read it once and did not reply. Then a coordinator from operations had called my personal number. I didn't recognize it and didn't pick up. The voicemail was from Becca. She said she was sorry to bother me. She said she'd been trying to run a vendor compliance update and didn't know where the tracker was. I felt for Becca. She was 3 weeks into a job and had been handed a live wire nobody had warned her about. I didn't call her back. Not because I wanted the company to suffer, but because the right version of this conversation had to happen at the right level and informal assistance before that would make it too easy for the actual problem to stay unexamined. The actual problem was not that the tracker was hard to find. The actual problem was that a manager had publicly humiliated and fired an employee using false accusations, and the company's entire delivery architecture had been built on a foundation nobody had acknowledged. That needed to be the conversation. When Philip Gaines called, it was legal had been looped in by Wednesday. This was not only about the internal employment situation. The Hartwell Logistics Breach Review had surfaced a compliance flag beyond the company itself, a federally required documentation update tied to the cold chain logistics protocol for medical-adjacent deliveries. That protocol had a 45-day renewal window. The trigger alerting the compliance team when the window opened was inside my operations framework. The framework had been running, but nobody could modify it. The renewal alert had fired to an email address tied to my revoked credentials. It had gone nowhere. The renewal window had been open for 11 days. Legal determined that if the renewal wasn't filed within 9 more days, Hartwell would be in breach of their federal vendor certification. That breach would cascade to the company. The fine structure was in the 6-figure range before any client liability was calculated. This was no longer just an HR matter. Philip Gaines called me again, shorter and more direct. Anna, we have a legal timeline requiring immediate action. You are the only person who knows this system well enough to act on it. What can I do to make this right? I listened. Vincent Caruso had not intended to change anything. That was what he told me when I called on Thursday, 2 days before I made my decision. I called to thank him properly, not just for speaking up at the table, but for the call to Philip Gaines I had since learned about, for saying a true thing without expectation. He was quiet for a moment. I only told someone what I saw, he said. The rest was already there. Then he told me something I hadn't known. His restaurant, Portillo's, was part of a hospitality group with 3 other locations and a small commercial catering division. He had been looking for about 6 months for someone with logistics and compliance experience. The person he needed had to understand vendor systems, regulatory requirements, and how to build processes that didn't collapse when one person was absent. He had been describing my job description without realizing it. I wasn't calling Philip Gaines to help you, he said. I called because I thought he should know what kind of person he was dealing with in both directions. And because if things didn't work out with your old company, I might want a conversation with you.
He paused.
I'd still like that conversation. Philip Gaines called me on Friday morning. He had spoken to the COO. He said there was something he wanted me to hear directly. He put the COO on a 3-way call. The COO's name was Patricia Holloway. I had emailed her exactly once in 7 years, on a company-wide compliance initiative. She was known internally as direct and fair, the kind of leader who made decisions based on what was in front of her. She got to the point immediately. She told me she had reviewed everything. The email chain, the contingency document, the operations framework architecture report, Vincent Caruso's account, the client escalation records, the compliance timeline. I want you to know, she said, that what was done to you was not acceptable. The manner in which you were terminated, the false accusations made publicly in front of your colleagues, and the fact that no one in leadership caught this sooner. I am responsible for that last part, and I own it. She paused. I also want you to know that Derek Simmons is no longer employed with this company. He was terminated yesterday. I had suspected this was coming. It still landed with weight. The circumstances were handled internally, she said. There was something almost ironic about the word internally. I didn't say that. The Bertrand Group paused their contract on Thursday. The formal notification came through their legal team, a 2-page letter outlining the documentation gaps, the compliance questions, and their decision to pause pending a resolution meeting. Polite the way legal letters are polite when what they mean is, we are watching and our lawyers have done the math. Bertrand represented roughly 18% of the division's active revenue. Senior leadership had been in back-to-back meetings since the letter arrived. The COO's office sent a response requesting a 2-week window to resolve the documentation issues. Bertrand agreed tentatively. 2 weeks was tight. Resolving those issues required someone with administrative access to the operations framework, someone who understood the compliance architecture, someone who knew which vendor relationships needed manual escalation. There was one person who fit all three. Philip Gaines knew it. Patricia Holloway knew it. The IT team knew it. And I knew it too. I had known it since the day I walked out of Portello's with a card from Vincent Caruso in my hand and a folder of forwarded emails on my phone. The question was never whether I could fix it. The question was whether I would, and on what terms. The full picture came together in a single document. IT compiled it, an architecture dependency report mapping every active client workflow to its underlying system component. 41 pages. I received a copy because Philip Gaines sent it with a note. I thought you should see what you built. I read through it slowly. 41 pages of infrastructure I had designed and maintained, item by item, over 4 years, without a title change or a budget line or a formal acknowledgement in any performance review. 17 client workflows. 4 compliance frameworks. 3 vendor escalation protocols built specifically to catch the kind of cascade failure currently unfolding. The report used the phrase single-point dependency 11 times. Each time, the dependency traced back to one person.
Me.
I thought about Derek standing at that table. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Said with the total certainty of someone who had completely miscalculated what he was holding on to. I thought about the 5-line reply. Likely manageable. I thought about the 53-page contingency document labeled incomplete. And then I thought about Patricia Holloway's voice on that call. Owning her part. Not performing accountability. Actually doing it. That mattered. It was the difference between a company that had a Derek problem and a company that was a Derek. One was fixable. Derek's termination happened on a Thursday. I pieced together the details from Priya, from Marcus, and from a brief note Philip Gaines sent me afterward. The meeting was in Patricia Holloway's office. No open floor plan. No audience. No restaurant. Just a closed door, a prepared termination package, and HR present as required. The irony was not lost on me. A man who had fired someone publicly, in front of her colleagues, was let go in a private room with paperwork and procedure. In some ways that was less satisfying than a public mirror image might have been. In other ways it was more fitting. Derek had made a termination into a performance. Patricia Holloway made his into a process. I heard that at some point in the meeting, Derek tried to reference the Kellerman account again. That he suggested the current operational issues confirmed his original assessment. Patricia had responded by opening a printed copy of my 41-page IT architecture report to the first page and sliding it across the table without comment. Derek had looked at it. Then he had signed the termination documents. He was given 30 minutes to clear his desk. No team announcement. No goodbye lunch. Just a box, a badge return, and a very quiet Thursday afternoon. The formal offer arrived by email on Monday at 9:02 a.m. Patricia Holloway's office sent it directly, not through standard HR recruitment, but as a personal communication from her to me. The offer was detailed: a return at a newly created title of Director of Operations Systems, a 31% salary increase, a formal charter to oversee the operations framework as an official company asset, and a direct reporting line to the COO. There was also a written apology. 2 paragraphs, signed by Patricia Holloway, acknowledging what had happened and what should have been different. I read the offer 3 times. It was good, genuinely good, not just financially but structurally. They had understood what went wrong and were trying to build what should have existed from the beginning. But I thought about a conversation I had already had. A card sitting on my kitchen counter since I walked out of Portello's. A man who had described my job description without knowing it, who had called Philip Gaines because he thought truth was worth saying, and who had told me he wanted a conversation. I composed a reply to Patricia Holloway. I told her I was grateful for the offer, and that I meant that sincerely. Then I declined. I called Vincent Caruso on Monday afternoon. We met at Portello's on Wednesday. Not the dining room, but a small office off the back of the kitchen. Espresso smell. Old paper. A city permit from 1987 on the wall. The kind of office that has been in continuous use by someone who knows what they're doing.
He had a folder on the desk.
I had my laptop and a legal pad. The conversation took 2 hours. By the end, Director of Compliance and Logistics Strategy for the Caruso Hospitality Group. For locations, a catering division, 2 planned expansions, and a compliance framework existing in scattered spreadsheets nobody owned comprehensively. Smaller than what I had left, but mine to build from the foundation up. And the person across the desk was someone who had said a true thing out loud because he thought it mattered. That was the kind of organization I wanted to build inside. I started the following Monday. On my first day, I set up a shared drive, labeled the first folder operations framework, and opened a blank spreadsheet. 7 months later, the Caruso Hospitality Group passed its city certification review with 0 findings. On my desk, I kept one sticky note. My own handwriting. 5 words. They fired me. I built this.